Welcome everybody to Porn Wars. And the question, is there ever a case for pornography or should it be off limits in an ethical society? So I need to now introduce our three guests. To my right is Catherine Lumby. Catherine is a well-known public commentator and gender politics advisor. She is the author of 7 books and director of the Journalism and Media Centre at the University of New South Wales. Next to her is Kate Holden. Kate is the author of the best-selling In My Skin, a memoir of about her years as a heroin addict and prostitute in Melbourne. In My Skin was shortlisted for awards in Australia and has since been published in 9 countries. Her latest memoir is the romantic Italian Nights and Days, and I highly commend it to you. I've read it and it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Gail Dines, who is the furthest, she's the furthest to my right. Gail Dines is a professor of sociology and women's studies at Boston's Wheelock College. Her latest book is Pornland: How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality. Gail is a recipient of the Meyer Center Award for the Study of Human Rights and a founding member of Stop Porn. So as you can tell, we've got people who really can try to help us to bury down into what the questions are that we need to ask about porn and whether or not it is something that we can or shouldn't be living with. So I'm going to start with Gail. Gail, can you just simply state your case against porn?
Yeah, I would argue, and when I'm talking about porn, I want to make it clear that I'm talking about the porn industry. I'm talking about the majority of pornography that men find when they put porn into Google. That's my concern. And what you see today is that the mainstream porn industry is dominated by what the industry calls gonzo. This is body-punishing, brutal, dehumanizing, debasing sex that basically is really about misogyny and woman-hating. It is mainstream pornography. I have industry data here that lists the top 50 bestsellers, best renters. 90% of them have gonzo. So there's no debate about that. This is the industry data. It's not me saying this. So I argue in a society where men get aroused, jerk off and ejaculate to images of women being debased and dehumanized, it is impossible to have real gender justice.
Gail, what's interesting to me is that I actually ran one of the experiments that you talk about right at the beginning of your book. So you talk about how what you decided to do was actually put porn into Google and follow, how long it basically took you to find whatever it was you found. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when I did it just a few days ago, I didn't arrive at any of the gonzo sites. I arrived at things like really gentle lesbian threesomes with pregnant women and pretty standard kind of, boy meets girl in a classroom and she's kind of looks clearly 20 but has a short skirt on. So I just wonder if you could tell us what other sorts of evidence, kind of hard evidence you've got. Well, that's you telling us what they're selling. And I guess one of the arguments it seems like you've also been making, because I've been listening to you on the news, is that very young boys are happening onto this stuff because it's free. And so I guess I just would like you to tell us a bit more about some of the other things you've said. For instance, I think you've said the earliest viewing age is age 11, and I think you've said there's multiple views for teenagers who are relatively young. About 80% are having multiple views.
Well, let me tell you what the study is. The study in Canada is showing that the average age is about 12, and they found, I think it was between 75 and 80% of boys by the age of 12 had regularly seen gonzo porn. Other studies put it at 11.5. I mean, obviously, you're looking at an age range, I would say, between about 11 and 15 when the first viewing of pornography. I mean, the truth is I don't know what to say to you because I don't know what else to argue, the industry data. I mean, we could all find different stuff. Of course, there's lesbian pornography, there's pregnancy pornography, there's this pornography and that. But what I'm interested in as a sociologist is when I study the industry is what is making the profit? What are men buying? What are men renting? Because that's what's actually shaping male sexuality. Because what I really want to know is what are men thinking? What are they using? And what are they getting aroused to, and how eventually is that going to translate into the real world?
Right. Okay, fantastic. And where do you sit? So often in this debate there are odd bedfellows, and this has been the case for many, many years, that you will often find radical feminists like yourself aligned in their views about pornography with Christians on the far right. Is that the same with you? Is that still the case?
I'd have to say that the average Christian right wouldn't want to get into bed with a radical feminist Marxist Jew. I don't think I'm that appealing to them, okay? So that would probably be the truth, okay? Let me tell you a story. When my book came out, I did get a lot of emails from the Christian right saying, you know, we'd love to have you on our radio. And I've got this theory, right? My theory is that the average Christian right woman would have been a feminist had we got there first. So I decided I'll talk to anybody about feminism. So I said, look, you know, great, I'll come on your show, let me send you a book. Never heard from them again. Not one. Okay? So this idea that we're in bed with the Christian right is actually a myth put out by the pro-porners. And you know what? I would really know who I was in bed with, and it's not them.
Is that the case? Because the other day you were on air with Melinda Tankard-Reist, and she's certainly someone who's a religious right kind of advocate here.
I've never actually been in bed with her, though. I mean, we've spoken, but... anyway, I mean, she's got certain views.
I shouldn't have used that. Clearly that was a mistake in terms of
posing the question. No, I mean, look, let me tell you, I'm
sure
sure there's certain positions you hold with people around issues that, you know, you hold on single issues, and you wouldn't want to be in bed with them, you wouldn't want to marry them, you wouldn't want to have any other ideas with them. But, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of a false, I think, disingenuous argument to say that just because I've got one position around that somehow we're in bed politically. That makes no sense to me.
Okay, fantastic. Now, Catherine, one of the things that seems to be the arguments that are being made here is that what we've got this problematic industry, and it's full of gonzo, and that's what's really selling well. And because this kind of garbage is going in, what's coming out, and this is really what the problem is, what's coming out is a really damaged male sexuality. Is it really that simple? Is it garbage in, garbage out?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and, you know, Gail and I met at a conference a couple of years ago, and one of the first things I want to say is this is called the porn wars, but... you know, I'm not comfortable with battle metaphors. I mean, pornography is a complex area, and I have respect for different views in this area, and I read the views of people that I may ultimately disagree with. So I think that's important to say. It shouldn't be a polemic. But I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old son. Last year, when Charlie was 10, he and a friend went on to a site called RedTube, which has a really broad range of pornographic material on it. It's free. You know, and the approach I took as a mother was to sit down with him and talk to him about why they visited the site, what they saw there, and so on. Now, I mean, I could say, look, my son comes from a household with a lot of cultural capital, where their parents were very engaged, as his friend has. So the first thing I'd say is I don't deny that there is very misogynistic, disturbing, hateful, pornographic material out there. I absolutely agree with that. The study that, the empirical porn research that I was involved in with Dr. Catherine Aubrey and Professor Alan McKee, and admittedly, it's an earlier study at this point, so I admit all the limitations of this is the book, the porn report, but it was done 2003, 2006, so things have moved on the internet. But what I do know more broadly is that the majority of media content now, across the media, is produced by media users. And there's a huge volume of content that's sexually explicit, if you actually go and look for it, and I think it's some of what you were referring to. That's, you know, these are people in their 60s, these are couples, and some of them are gay, some of them are straight, producing material that's about their own sex lives and exchanging it with people who are interested in looking at that. And one of the really surprising findings to me when we did a study of over 1,000 porn consumers in Australia was that one of the highest preferences that porn consumers, men and women, cited, well, actually more men than women cited, was real-looking bodies, which kind of surprised me because I thought the Barbie doll thing would reign, but it didn't. And I think human sexuality is a pretty messy business. But I say that also recognising, as someone, you know, like Gail, who's been a feminist for a very long time, and I'm sure probably Kate would weigh in on this too, someone who's absolutely deeply involved as an activist in sexual violence prevention, that whether it's actual sexual violence or whether it's representations of sexual violence, I'm against it. And it disturbs and upsets me. And I certainly think we need to do more education in schools with young boys and girls, actually, about both not just consuming this material but producing it and how they manage this new media era.
But the word you're not using, which is interesting, and Gail also hasn't used it, it's that, that dreaded word, the C word, censorship. So where does that fit into this debate?
Well, I read a really boring 100-page report on this that came out last week.
Summarise it for us, please, just dot points.
Well, what I argue is this simple, and Professor Kate Crawford wrote it with me. What we looked at is how do you manage media content in the convergent media era? And that's an era in which media users are producing most of the content, yes, of course, there's still pornography and other media content produced by, glossy production houses. But the majority of media content outstrips the capacity of any government agency to regulate it. Filters certainly don't work to, in a granular way, regulate that stuff. So what we say is media users as a community need to be brought into a stakeholder relationship with industry and government. I won't give you all the details on that. The report's called The Adaptive Moment, if anyone's got insomnia.
But essentially what you're saying is, in other words, that the things you were advocating, which is that parents really need to be more active.
I think that's where education needs to be in the mix, because you can't assume that all parents, single or double-digit parents, are going to be able to have that role. I mean, my view is, I think certainly the research shows that what kids, young boys or girls, take out of media is very, very formed by what values they've already been modelled. And so I think that we need to work very young in education, and we need to be honest about pornography and its existence. That's really critical. And you need to be able to talk to kids, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a parent, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'll just ask Gail a quick question and then I'm going to get to Kate. Where do you stand on the censorship issue?
First of all, as a lefty who has no faith whatsoever in a government controlled by corporations, right, it would be unthinkable to suggest that a government is going to do anything on behalf of women. Let's face it, have you ever met a politician that doesn't love capitalist organisations? What I would argue is that because we live in a capitalist society, we need to bring the porn industry into line with every other industry, which means that if we can prove that they have caused harm, just as if you get in a car tomorrow and you get killed because they did something wrong with the actual car, you can sue them, okay? I would say the same thing with pornography, that if you can prove harm, and it would be very difficult to prove harm, I'm not saying it wouldn't be, but if you can prove harm, then I think you should be able to sue it. And I just want to answer one other thing about the idea that children, it's not in and out the same thing. This concept is called polysemic text, where, you can see an image and you see lots of different things, like you go and see a movie and you fight with somebody for 2 hours over you saw 2 different movies, even though it's the same movie. Let me tell you, though, I cannot imagine how you can have different readings of a man sticking his penis down a woman's throat till she chokes, as he calls her a cum dumpster. How can you read that as empowerment to women? As far as I'm concerned, there's no debate around that.
Kate, you are literally in the middle here and offer, I think, kind of a unique perspective in some ways. So based on your experience, both having worked in the sex industry and now post that, do you find men as affected by porn as Gail says, in what they want, in bed, and in relationships?
I was reflecting on this, and first of all, I have to say that it's 10 years since I was in the sex industry, so obviously things may have changed. I have to say that while as someone who was brought up in second-wave feminism, I went into the sex industry originally believing that it was probably an institution which systematically oppressed women, exploited them for profit, and was entirely engaged in enabling men's kind of ferocious desires on the bodies of women. I came out of that experience with almost the entire opposite view. And when I went into sex work, I originally started at the kind of the grimy and the unregulated end, working on the street, and I then went to work in brothels. In the 2 brothels that I worked in, there were television screens in each bedroom. And in the first brothel I worked at, there was always a porn movie playing. Is that all right? Can you hear me? And the place where I worked was not the most high quality of all institutions, and it was run by a really dopey guy who somehow off the back of a truck acquired a lot of really bad 80s porn, which mostly featured kind of Mad Max scenarios. Everyone was wearing headbands, lots of fringed leather garments, and terrible synth tracks that just droned on and on and on. And we would have these running in the rooms all the time. They were so hilarious that there was nothing to be offended by in them. They were absolutely just ridiculous. And but it was really the first time, I have to say, that I had seen pornography. I'm very straight. Porn doesn't really interest me at all, I should state. And this was a kind of an anthropological experience for me. So I was paying attention, and I did notice that there was a bit of a variety. There were these really kind of cliched Mad Max, pack of men goes driving on the road in their shaggy leather garments and encounters a woman and has sex with her in various ways. And then there were some that were more disturbing to my eyes. There was one I remember that featured a woman in a cage with various penises being poked through the bars at her, which I did not find an attractive or appealing spectacle.
Can I ask though, did you feel like it was affecting? So when you had men coming in, were they saying, I really can't do it without the porn on, or I need to watch this particular video? Were they asking you to play out things that you might have imagined or you knew they had seen in a porn film?
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that most of this stuff was so kind of banal that it actually was just kind of background wallpaper, and most of the clients that I saw barely looked at it. If they did, they kind of sniggered away with me. I have 3 examples of clients who came in who I felt were affected by pornographic iconography. There was one gentleman who would come in and he would book me or one of the other ladies, and he would demand that the porn was on, and he would ask me to get out of the way while he was watching it. So I would be having sex with him and he'd be like, can you just move your head slightly to the left because, you're blocking the view. So he would have this fantasy experience running at the same time as a real live girl was having sex with him. But I have to say, he didn't seem to be a maladjusted guy to me. He was an extremely sane person. That was just what he liked to do, and he was paying for the service, and that was fine with me. Then I remember there were 2 young boys, probably somewhere over 18 and under 20, who came in one night, and they said, in a brothel, you discuss the service with the lady before you go into the room, and they said, what we'd really like to do is ejaculate on your face. And I said, oh, I don't think so. And they said, oh, but wouldn't you like it? And I said, well, not a lot. Like, why would you think I would enjoy that? What makes you imagine? They said, well, we've seen lots of porn movies, the money shot. And I said, well, quite apart from the fact I'll have to redo all my makeup, there are sexual health issues with semen getting into the membranes of your eyes and HIV transmission and so on. And it's just not a very nice thing to do to someone. So they were the experiences I had, but I have to say they were absolutely the exception in my experience.
So in other words, that the vast majority weren't asking for that sort of thing. And what about after? Because your book, The Romantics, takes us kind of, into your life post-sex work, and it's still, a fraught world with relationships, and you're still having, you're dealing with lots of different sorts of relationships. Has it ever come up in those relationships?
Well, look, I had sex with hundreds of men. This is a great thing to say to an audience of hundreds of people.
I hope your mother's listening.
I did, in the brothels, and then obviously I've had sexual encounters in normal life. I've got to say the majority of my experiences are that men are stupid in bed rather than malign. I don't think we can underestimate, and all respect to the gentlemen in the audience, but I think very few people understand how many men are kind of cretinous in bed, but it's out of ignorance rather than, spite. So that was more the issue I had. I ran a one-woman education campaign, but very, believe me, there are women out there who are thanking me to this day, But, that's part of the thing, and I suppose this ties into the pornography element, is that there is an educational aspect to teaching people how to make love, and you would be amazed at how many men have no idea what they're doing.
Catherine?
Yeah, I just want to say, Kate, gorgeous description. This is one of the things, and of course Gail may have something to say about this, but one of the things we found in the Australian study, and I emphasise this was very much an Australian study, was that we did a study of over 1,000 porn consumers, 20% of whom were women, some of them were gay as well as straight, and we asked them, because almost all the research into pornography has been about what are the adverse effects, how has this made things worse, So we just asked them in this research, well, has it had any positive effect? And one of the top ones was that about 45% watched it with their partner, gay or straight, and they felt that it was a kind of, at times it was something that they used in their sex life, and it made their sex life better at times. But one of the other ones was that they used it for learning really basic anatomical things, like learning how to go down on a woman, yes. Which a lot of, let's just be honest, and maybe this is a failure of our education system, a lot of young boys, where's the clitoris? What the hell's that? It's a
huge failure.
It's trying to play a tiny violin on the deck of a sort of sinking ship to a lot of guys, and it takes a while.
That's right. Well, until recently, apparently, they were drawing it anatomically incorrect in medical books. So it's not really surprising that we weren't getting it right. Gail.
Yeah, can I say, I think this is a, fun, great conversation. I don't think it's got anything to do with reality. When you look at what pornography is, when you go out there and you look at the research, and let me tell you, your book is very different to 30 years of research. And what was interesting as an academic is that you didn't engage with any of the research. You said there was no research or very little research. And I'm looking in the back for all the names of the psychologists, experimental psychologists, who for 30 years have got a body of research. And it felt a bit to me like the climate deniers, that you refuse to engage in the empirical research that we now have from 30 years. So let me talk about the idea of what men learn from pornography, because I go across the country in the United States of America. I speak to thousands of men. I also listen to my students. My students don't have that experience. My students tell me that their boyfriends are not interested in them sexually. They want to get off as quick as possible. Most of them will not do oral sex. They insist that they get rid of all their pubic hair because they're disgusted by it, because they're used to looking at pornography with women with no pubic hair. The reality of it is that they're not looking at people making love. In pornography, and again, I'm looking at mainstream pornography that most men use, men do not make love to women, they make hate. All the things that you associate with love, connection, intimacy, all of those things are missing, and in its place is disgust and revulsion and anger and rage. And I'm telling you, if you want to know what really pornography is, don't take my word. Go on Adult Video News when you go home. Go to the charts, look up, and go onto the websites. Don't take my word for it, just go and see it. And what I would like, if we're going to talk about pornography, let's talk about the real industry. Otherwise, we may as well just talk about, pornography that maybe 5 people are watching.
Well, actually, what you just cited was anecdotal evidence. So I think what would be fantastic is, I was going to ask you this anyway, can you give us the study that you think shows that your view, and I'm not talking about, how many films are in Gonzo. I'd like to know the study that says, here's the one that shows us that how many boys are watching it, how often they're watching it, and how their sexuality is being distorted as a consequence.
No, I can't.
That's the data that I looked for.
Right,
I looked for it.
Okay, let me tell you where to go.
I'd be interested.
Okay, the best thing to go to really look at it is by a man named Neil Malamuth. And why it's good is he did what's called a meta-analysis, which in academia means you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of research and you're making sense of it. What I would suggest, don't look at one study, look at the hundreds, and that's what Neil Malamuth did with Mary Koss in the Annals of Psychological Journal. And in there, he talks about what the findings are. And I have to tell you, as a social scientist, you don't point to one study. What kind of a social scientist would I be to point to one study? I'm pointing to hundreds and hundreds of studies. And they're all in the back of my book, so I really do encourage you all to buy my book, and you will see the lists and lists of studies, so no question. And Neil Malamuth is the one
So these
study.
are the studies, because I did miss them, these are the studies that say, here's what they're doing, here's how often they're doing it, and here's how we know that the thing we then see in the future, which you're calling an inauthentic, I think, or distorted sexuality, is connected to that porn watching.
Absolutely, without question. 30 years of them.
Catherine.
Gail, as I say, I say anything to you respectfully and with an ethic of engagement, and I have read your work, and, as I said, you and I were at a conference together. The one thing I would want to clarify is that we did do a meta-analysis when we did this, and we read a lot of the American research, and what I was saying is that one of our conclusions, and this is, I think, often, for me, true about social science research in the US, is that it often comes to objects of media studies with a view of, well, what harm is it doing? And I guess that's probably very much where we differ methodologically. I think the media studies framework in Australia is different. But, I know the study you're talking about, and we did read those things. The second thing I'd say is that we could sit here for hours or, weeks, really, debating different methodologies and so on. But I think that really what is animating this conversation in many ways is a different perspective on human sexuality. And I'm absolutely, you're a feminist, Kate is, I am. But taking from what Kate says, I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, that we kind of come at this idea of sexuality and heterosexuality with a view that there's something inherently messy in that business and messy in desire. And when you use that word inauthentic, that's a word that I don't really quite understand, because I think there are many ways of being a sexual being, and I think one kind of relationship is monogamous and you're in love and all of these things, but I think there are other ways of being sexual.
And I would completely agree. When I say inauthentic, I don't mean Gail Dines has the one way you be sexual and you better follow me, otherwise you're inauthentic. What I'm saying is, look, at pornography is to sex what McDonald's is to food. It's an industrialisation of it, okay? It's the generic, formulaic, plasticized, technologised version of sex, commodified and industrialised. What I am saying is that sex is messy. There's 1,000 ways to have sex. It grows out of your experiences. It grows out of who you are. It is not going to grow out of the porn industry. Why would you want to go to a bunch of white men for authentic, creative sexuality, for fuck's sake? I mean, go to your own lives. Go to who you are. But this is what is surprising. Would you go to any capitalist for anything authentic? So I'm saying this kills authenticity. And you know what's authentic? It's what you define for yourself that makes sense in your life, not what some capitalist decides for you.
We're going to move to questions soon, so I'm going to ask one more question of the panel. In the meantime, our lovely people are going to wander around and respond to your raised hands by giving you a microphone. Kate, I think the last question I'd really like to throw at you. In some ways, it seems to me like a friend of mine told me the other day that there's two big things that motivate us. One is fear and one is hope. And apparently in any electoral contest you'll ever have, that's what the politicians will be at the centre of their campaigns. It will either be fear or it'll be hope. And I just wonder whether or not, in some senses, I thought the Romantics was a kind of, as you acknowledge, a kind of acknowledgement of the complexity of the whole thing, and the acknowledgement that we have defined women and defined their sexuality and their reproduction in a particular way for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and now suddenly we're offering something different. And in some ways it seemed to me like what you were portraying was what that was like as a human being on the ground, trying to live that new way of thinking about what we are and what we're entitled to, but crashing up against the old ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my book, The Romantic, is a memoir about my experience, and it's also a story, I think, of a young woman, myself, who's enfranchised, white, middle-class, highly educated, has every reason to feel like a powerful woman, a feminist, and yet my behaviour did not always match what I idealised as what a feminist in those circumstances would do. And I think there's a theme in the book, which is that women have so much over-determination coming at them, and some of it is laudable, some of it is very difficult and oppressive. But in even the laudable, the aspirational feminist or powerful woman that we try to be is not always achievable, and there is conflict within ourselves then. So if I went off and I offered or I let a hotel concierge in Naples have sex with me when I didn't really want to. I then punished myself by analysing why it was, and I went off and I called myself a fucking thing. You fucking slut, you thing. Why did you do that? And yet I don't think I was a slut. I don't think I was a thing. What I was wrestling with these two different dynamics, and I was trying to be romantic while they were trying to see me sexually. There was so much confusion in this relationship.
And what do you aspire to? So what is that aspiration in terms of sexuality?
Well, I imagine I should be someone who says no when I mean no, who says, I want to do this, you're going to do this for me, this is how you touch my clitoris, this is how you do everything else. But even with my experience and my advantages and prerogatives in life, I'm not always that person, and I find it more interesting to acknowledge that than to deny it. So my project is to educate myself into being more like that, but not be hard on myself or on other women for not matching that ideal.
Can you teach me when you put
it
down?
That's right, and then you'll be out on the hustings teaching everybody else. So have we got our first question over here? Eva.
Well, as another sort of Jewish sociologist, lefty, etc., Gail, I'd like to ask you a question. Why do we always focus on violent pornography and misogynist violent pornography rather than on violent misogynist violence? Is there something sort of inherent in a particular type of feminism that manages to treat anything to do with sexuality, including sex workers, as something different from the ordinary? It does worry me, because I think we can all discuss whether or not we want violent misogyny, but why do we actually have to focus on the pornography area and make such a fuss about it because it is part of a pornography thing. I mean, I think that echoes some very puritanical views that unfortunately often appear in feminism around the things to do with sex. And the second part of my question, which is just a very quick one, is you say, OK, you're against the idea of government sort of actually running any sort of censorship. Well, how would you feel when your book's used by the Tea Party to actually put up various legislation to ban most of the things we care about?
Oh, my God. Did
Gail.
the Tea Party even read books? I didn't realise that. No, I'm sorry, that's a classist statement. I shouldn't say that.
Australia breaking the bad news.
I take that back. Let me tell you, the Tea Party ain't reading my book, right? And so let's talk about it. But let's think about I'm going to answer your question. Let's talk about why I'm looking at violent pornography. Well, no, actually, I'm not looking at violent pornography. I'm looking at mainstream pornography through the industry, which happens to be violent and body punishing and brutal. I also look at violence in the media. That was also what I study. And I look at the effects of violence in the media. So I think, but as feminists, I think we need to put the focus off women. I am sick to death of talking about women. I want to talk about men, okay? I want to put the focus on masculinity, on men, what makes them tick, why do they rape, why do they abuse, why do they do what they do. And you know what? I'm not saying it's just pornography. Of course it's not. There's multiple reasons. But I believe, as the mother of a son, that boys do not come out with a honing device for gagonmycock.com. Right? The culture trains them for this. And I want to know what it is in our culture that ends up with men being violent and abusive and all the things that they do, not just to women, but in the world in general and to the earth. And one place, not the only place, but one place is pornography.
We have another question over here.
Gail, you said the other day on radio that pornography was a public health policy issue. Could you say something more about that and why you think that that's an issue?
Yes, I think, well, given the studies now that are coming out of the USA around addiction to pornography as well, and I want to say I never bought into the addiction model. I used to think addiction was really a way of men not taking responsibility, and the porn made me do it. Now, after interviewing so many therapists and after reading the reports now in the psychological literature, something is going on about habitual use to gonzo pornography in a way it wasn't to Playboy and Penthouse. I would argue that in order to talk about how we're going to affect male sexuality, how we're going to reshape male sexuality outside of a porn culture, we need to bring in educators, we need to bring in health experts, we need to bring in community activists, we need to bring in parents, all of these people to attack this issue. Because to be honest with you, we're in the middle of a social experiment. We have never before brought up a generation of men and boys on hardcore pornography. Never before. Do you want to live in this world where the average boy's first introduction is basically, I don't know, anally ripped whores? Is that the world you want to live in? And then let me ask you a question. When these boys grow up and go and become politicians and doctors and lawyers and decide how women and children live, do you think they're going to look us in the eye and see a human being, or are they going to see an anally ripped whore? And for me, I don't want to take that risk.
Actually, you know, what interests me, I'm going to get Catherine to just respond to that as well, but what interests me is that when I was growing up in the 80s, the thing that was going to make boys all of these things that, you know, now young men and older men would be, was snuff films. And in fact, that was actually at the time seen to be the thing that all of a sudden changed everything from the innocent Playboy to the new thing. So, Catherine, do you feel like, in fact, we really are in a new era?
Look, I think that the new era we're in that's not really being talked about enough here is the era in which media users are now producing the majority of media content. And actually, if you really look at that sort of content, what you find is that, as I said before, this is not gonzo porn. What a lot of this is men and women, and some of them gay, some of them straight, in lots of different contexts, producing stuff at home. I mean, it's, you know, without being disrespectful, some of it's hilarious because, you know, there's a fluffy dressing gown hanging on the mirror and the wardrobe door.
Believe me,
and
I just saw some of it
yeah,
the other
you
day.
think some of it, right? And that's actually now the majority of what's out there. But the second thing with addiction is that we looked deeply into this question of addiction. And again, with respect, Gail, I have to say, in Australian and European media studies context, we disagree with this metaphor of addiction, whether it's addiction to television or the internet, or it's used a lot in the popular media. It's very much a US metaphor. But it's a bat hitting a ball metaphor. It actually, you know, in our study, for instance, we found the vast majority of porn consumers, or certainly the majority of porn consumers, were consuming it for a lot less than an hour a week, and that if they were consuming it, they were consuming it with a partner. So it just, I guess this
What
idea...
about the bigger
image,
question about what happens to all women? Because I think that's, Gail, in some ways what you're saying is you're not just saying this harms the people who are watching it. You're saying, because you say at the end of your book, you want a world that's more full of equality and justice, and the implication being that this kind of behaviour amongst individuals that becomes problematic because of porn manifests itself in larger ways that make the world a more problematic place for women. So do you see that as a problem?
Well, I mean, I've been working as a sort of activist, as Eva and other people in this room have, in sexual violence prevention, in terms of sexual violence against women and children since 1980, I guess. And one of the things that got me interested in debates around pornography and feminism was I was really concerned to understand what role did it play. Now, I understand, Gail, that you think it plays an important role. I understand your passion there, because I think we're equally passionate about preventing sexual violence. My conclusions from reading all the literature and for a range of other things have been that it's played too prominent a role in sexual violence prevention, that we need to move to more empirical and evidence-based solutions that are, in my view, evidence-based.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Sorry,
Catherine?
Sure.
Okay, so as a feminist, and I'm sure somebody who doesn't believe that men are born rapists, where would you look to the culture to explain how men are violent? I mean, if you're going to have to explain that from a cultural perspective,
Sure.
and I'd like to ask you, I'm not saying it's only pornography, but would you not say in a society where this is the defining discourse around sexuality that it doesn't play a role?
No, what I would say is and I already said this, that there's misogynist violent porn. I see misogyny sometimes in margarine ads, frankly, so maybe I look too closely for it. But I mean, I can see problematic content in relation to how women are represented all the time. I have a problem with talking about pornography as though it's one thing. I think it's incredibly diverse, and I think it's become much more diverse. And my concern is that as feminists, that we seem to keep coming back to this space. And I think prevention is pretty new in sexual assault work. We know this. We were picking up the pieces for years. And so certainly in the Australian context, there's a lot of evidence-based research about what works. And in fact, I'm involved in that with a range of people, working with the National Rugby League, which is a culture, a very male-dominated culture that's had issues with sexual assault, and we're working on education programs, and it's around attitudinal change and long-term cultural change. But I don't see in any of the research I've done there over 7 years that pornography is a major part of it.
Who has the mic right there?
This is a question for Kate. Did the brothel you were working in have any rules as to the sex workers working there, as in when they could say no to certain requests? Was there a inbred protocol as to this goes, this doesn't?
Oh, yes, no, absolutely, there were rules. I mean, this is not a discussion about sex work, but absolutely. I mean, I worked in legal, regulated brothels, which were inspected by health inspectors. There were definitely rules. Everything was designed, theoretically, to protect women. There should have been no violence. There should have been no trespass against what the women wanted. In reality, of course, there was, but that's because we live in the real world. And as many measures as possible were taken to prevent that, and I generally felt very safe. I had some horrible experiences, but I generally felt very safe.
Thanks, Kate. I think we'll go on to someone else.
I have a question for Gail. You mentioned a bit earlier that you're finding that from your clients or your research, it's not making love that's happening, it's making hate. But could you expand on that a little bit more?
The making hate? Yes. I mean, when you look at the pornography and you watch it and you kind of deconstruct it scene by scene, what you're seeing, for example, I mean, let me just read to you, for example, the promotional copy on a popular movie, right, called Anally Ripped Horse. And this is actually the promotional copy. We at Pure Filth know exactly what you want, and we're giving it to you. Chicks being ass-fucked till their sphincters are pink, puffy, and totally blown out. Adult diapers just might be in store for these whores when their work is done. I don't know what else you would see if not hate. I mean, somebody else might see this as a polysemic text about the empowerment of women, but I'm having trouble with that one, I can tell you.
We've got a few people with microphones now. I'm looking for a man because this is an unusual conversation that so far it has been dominated by women. So I'm going to let this gentleman go first, and then I'm going to come back to this woman down here in the front.
Hello. Ooh, a bit
Where
loud.
are you?
It's not a controversial question, but it is a question for Kate. I'm just, because I read both of your books, Kate, and I really, really enjoyed them. I thought they were very, very well written, very sensitively written, and emotionally balanced written. My question to you is, what are you doing now with your life, and have you got another book coming out?
Oh, look, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to take that
We've
question.
got so many other
but
people,
you can
but
feel
thank you
free
very much.
Yeah, you can feel free to ask Kate that afterwards. This woman here in the front.
Is this on? Yes.
Yeah,
I noticed that there isn't a man...
Oh, this poor man over here. I'll get to him, I promise. Next.
I noticed that there isn't a man on the panel and wonder about the significance of that, and is this an issue that's of more interest and concern to women than it is to men?
Who would like to take that?
I didn't hear it.
Okay, the question was, it's interesting that there's no men on the panel. Is this an issue that's more interesting to women than men? Right. Catherine?
Yeah, actually, I mean, Alan McKee, who's actually gay, who wrote the book with Kath Aubrey and I, both of us feminists, on pornography, one of the things that motivated him to get into this space was that as a gay man, he said that pornography was and this is one of the things we found in our study, was his first encounter with other gay sexual activity, and that he felt, you know, he wasn't as odd as he thought he was, growing up in a household which was very homophobic. And I think that's a really valid point. I think that we do need a lot more men in this debate. And there are certainly men, you know, we did quite a bit of research in the US actually on the porn industry, you know, in terms of what the working conditions were like, the sort of things that Kate's talking about. And in Australia, there's no commercial porn industry. It's all do-it-yourself because of our censorship laws, basically. There's no incentive to have an industry. But, you know, we certainly came across men who represent what Gail's talking about, the gonzo end of it, you know, just appallingly, you know, criminal stuff, if you ask me. I mean, just beyond the pale stuff. But we also came across a lot of men and women who are working together to look at, well, what would ethical porn look like? You know, what would the conditions of production look like? You know, how would you change that? And I think it's in the sexual assault prevention space or any of these spaces, we need men to be involved. It can't just be women. I mean, it's got to be a coalition.
Can I answer that as well? I've got a concept, right? In the old days, when the left would go marching against the Vietnam War and the men would be at the front and the police would be coming at them, they would shout, "Chicks up front." That was a term. And what it would mean would all the women would come up so that the men wouldn't be attacked by the police. My argument is that the pornography industry has chicks up front. It pushes women forward to represent them. I can't tell you how many panels I have been on where there's no men, because the pornographers have women who do their dirty business and their bidding. And people talk about porn as a women's issue. Men make porn, men get rich from porn, men jerk off to porn. Where the fuck is a woman's issue in all of this? I mean, this is an absolute mistake that we have a panel here. I want to speak to porn users. I think a man who uses gonzo should be up here and we should be listening to him instead of us debating it from a feminist perspective.
Right. Well, I'll certainly speak for myself that I'm no machine of the porn industry, and I think Catherine would probably go along with me there. Yes, you there.
My question is for Miss Dines. That list you've got there, the bestseller list, so that's sellers as in that's been paid for?
Sorry?
Are those the films that have been paid for?
Yes, this is the industry. Yes, these are paid for, yes.
We're in a modern age where the consumers create their own images. Where is the research and the data that talks about the films created by people in their own houses?
And you know what, there needs to be research done on that, but I can tell you, when my students, when we talk about pornography, this is what they're watching. They're not watching that amateur porn. The average 18 to 25-year-old men that I speak to, and again, I'm talking about thousands of men.
But you're saying they're paying for it? Any 18 to 25-year-old man will know you can get it for free anywhere.
Paying for it. They're paying for it, yes, of course they're paying for it.
They're not paying for it, we're getting it for free.
Okay, you know better than me.
Why would I spend my money on something that I can
I don't think we want to be confessing.
Okay, I have a question. Who is paying for it? Where is the $97 billion a year
What are the demographics?
From?
What are the age groups of the people that are paying for the films?
Excuse me, that's enough. Thanks. I just want to give everybody a chance. This woman here.
Oh, okay. So I was just wondering where the girls are on the panel for my age group, because we're the girls who are sleeping with the guys who are watching porn, and I've got 3 housemates, men, and if their door aren't shut every night watching porn and the shit that comes out of their mouth, so then we go to pubs in these little skirts because these guys like us to, and then we go back and they're saying to us, we want to put it in your ass, we're going to do this. It's like it is having a massive impact, and I think it's a little bit hard for women that are married, women who are married and who are educated and everything like that, and can sit up there beautifully and say, my husband would look at porn, your son is looking at porn, but he would never tell mummy that he's looking at porn, and he won't tell that he goes home and says to the girl, oh, I'm going to come on your face, because it happens, and it's happening more. And we have to deal with this shit. And it's
Absolutely. And where is the feminism that is speaking to your lives? That's
Well,
what I want to
exactly.
know.
Where are the strong role models?
If we're going to have a feminist movement worth its name, we have to stop being middle-aged, privileged women and deciding that we know what's best
Just
for
because
you.
your husband doesn't watch it doesn't mean everybody
totally
else.
agree
Okay,
with
I'm
you.
going to take that as a question, thank you. I think what we've got is an assertion, again, based on personal experience. I think just to clarify, both Catherine and I come from research backgrounds, and so does Gail. So we really are trying very hard to move from anecdotal evidence, and I'm sure that everybody here feels very passionately about porn and has particular experiences which I am in no way suggesting are invalid. Absolutely not. I would not presume anything about the sexuality and what we get up to anyway on the panel, but we certainly are trying, and I'm trying very hard to make sure that in addition to anecdotal evidence, which is very interesting and really enables us to kind of get the colour and feel of something, that we also try to look at how common is that? Are you one out of the box, or are you an indicator of a much larger phenomenon? And that's what research is. So what we'll do is we'll go to this man here.
Yeah, I just want to know where you were looking. You say you're looking at, this research method, but you couldn't find any of the gonzo. I stopped using porn after 30 years of using it because it was just getting so out of control. I started to feel sick about myself after using it. So the idea that it's not having an effect, the idea that you get on and you find happy little couples and people are sitting down, with their partners, this is so unusual in the overall experience of porn. And everyone you speak to, everyone I've ever known, sits alone in a room staring at a box. And this idea that it's happening at this high-end, middle-class level where, guys are finding out how not to be cretins by watching 8 guys come on a girl's face.
Absolutely.
I just find bizarre.
Thank you for that. I'll take that as a comment. Have we got a question?
Gail, is it? Sorry. With that research, as a user of porn, I can tell you that, and most of my mates don't actually pay for porn because you can get onto free websites. And you go onto the website, there's different categories depending on what you want to watch. So if you want to watch anal, you can watch that. If you want to watch a blonde or a brunette or an Asian or whatever. There's 2 categories going back to the sort of emphasis that we've got on porn at the moment and the way that this debate's going. It's on hardcore violent porn. But there's 2 categories on every website which are always very popular as well. There's the amateur porn and as well as erotica. Now, erotica is kind of, they've got nice music in the background, they've got candles and whatnot, and it's quite, it's kind of lovemaking as opposed to
Can we go to the question bit?
Yeah, and then there's the amateur. Now, amateur is obviously people who've recorded themselves with their partners or whatever and put them up there. But I'd just like to point out that they're 2 areas of pornography which are actually quite central.
Right, so this is a comment.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that comment. I
ignored.
think we've definitely established that there's different kinds of porn out there. I'm definitely looking for that question.
Hi. Just following on from the brave young woman who did speak from her own experience. Thank you. As a Gen Xer and a fellow feminist sister, I'm just wondering whether, and I really get kind of annoyed with the porn war debates and the debates between feminists who are sex positive or anti-porn, and I'm wondering whether the whole debate is completely redundant when porn has completely permeated into every part of our society. It's not just what people are paying for or what they're consuming online. Porn has become mainstream. Just watch a music video. I watched some music videos about a year ago and I hadn't seen them for a while, and I was really kind of like, well, this is porn. I mean, this is what 5-year-old kids, 11-year-old girls, this is what they're watching on a Saturday morning. So the question is the way you're framing the debate, is it redundant? Should we actually be asking a different question?
Can I answer that? That's a great question. Thank you very much. Actually, I'll let Catherine go first, and then I'll let Kate, because I don't think Kate's had much of a go.
Well, I would like to just say that I think you're right. I think there is. I think what we're all saying is that there is an issue, but I think that identifying porn as the main culprit is perhaps a little bit simplistic. I think what I experienced in the sex industry, as I was saying, was actually that men just need a lot more education about sex in general. They may be looking to porn to get it, but I think if we somehow could educate young men in what loving sex looks like and means, then we might actually start counteracting a lot of the more malignant forms of sexuality in general.
And I mean, how I'd like to follow up on that comment, Kate, is that, and also to follow up to the question about young women, I mean, I always have a problem when anal sex is seen as a bad thing. I mean, I don't think it's everybody's taste, but I mean, I've got lots of gay friends and they find that really offensive, that it's demonised or stigmatised. There are heterosexual people who enjoy anal sex, and as long as it's done safely and consensually, I don't have a personal problem with that. No, and if it's not done safely and consensually, that's bad. But any form of sexual activity is not okay if it's not safe and consensual and ethical.
And is that the point that someone else was trying to get to, which is whether or not this debate is proxy for the real question we're trying to ask, which is there a lot of non-consensual, unpleasant, oppressive sex that's going on out there that women don't feel capable of standing up to, saying no to, and that seems to me, yes, I hear what you're saying. I really do actually hear what you're saying, and you've made a very good point. Yeah,
Can I answer the question? I never got to answer the question that was asked. Can I do that first?
Sure. I just wanted to say one more thing about that, though, because, Catherine, I think you were trying to say that you were trying... Oh, sorry, maybe not. Maybe she wasn't trying to say anything. Gail, go ahead.
Can I just answer? Thank you. First of all, no one's talking about whether anal sex is good or bad. We're talking about how it works in pornography and the role of it and how it seeps into the lives of these women. So that's a separate issue. The other thing about the pornification of society, that is the key here. Why we don't have much softcore pornography is because most of softcore porn has migrated into pop culture. It has become the dominant way of seeing women's bodies. As the porn culture or pop culture becomes more pornographic, the regular pornography has to become more hardcore as a way to distinguish itself from pop culture. What these women are living in is you are told now, the young women in this world, you have two choices. You're either fuckable or invisible. And that is your absolute choice. And then it gets even worse, right? Because let me tell you, your friends are walking around with the low-slung jeans, with the thong sticking out, the tramp stamp, the pierced belly button and the low-cut blouse. If you choose not to do that, then you will be rendered invisible. And so when young women who have an absolute developmental need to be visible have to dress like that and then get slammed as sluts and are then told by some bizarre feminist movement that you're empowered because that was your choice, I mean, this is like the mindfuck of the century because of what you are having to deal with. So I would like to hear the young women here make a real noise and to take back the feminist movement because it has been hijacked from you by a bunch of women who are absolutely removed from the realities of the culture.
Do you want to say something? Go ahead.
You know, I grew up in a working-class city called Newcastle. I was born in 1961. I witnessed sexual assault of my friends. I witnessed sexual assault of children. It's one of the reasons I became an activist. And one of the things I would say is that, yes, we live in an extremely imperfect world when it comes to male attitudes to women, and it concerns us all deeply, clearly. But I lived in a community where women got pregnant at 15 and had their first backyard abortion, and a lot of them got married at 16 and they left school. And so and I know that I'm talking about, middle-class privilege now. I certainly didn't grow up with that. But one of the things I have seen is a lot of progress. Call me an optimist, but I think that young women today have a lot more opportunities overall when it comes to education and opportunities for careers. It's not good enough yet, and we need to work on that. And one of the things I've got to say is that a lot of the sort of sexual assault and abuse that I saw going on, and domestic violence I saw going on in Newcastle, was well before the age of internet porn.
And Kate, I think that's... just to follow on that point, I think your books really speak quite eloquently about the problem of saying no. I think, if anything, in fact, I think the gentleman who was speaking before was really alluding to that in your book you are very open and honest about the incredible tension that in some ways Gail is talking about between, on the one hand, wanting to do what the other person wants you to do, dress, behave, but then also feeling like you want to try and find your own voice and your own sexuality. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, yeah, look, I'm not Gen Y, so my experience is probably slightly different. But in my experience, my tension was found in trying to reconcile my sexuality, my sexual desires, and yet having them framed as being somehow co-opted by men. I've been accused of having false consciousness, which is something that some feminists use, and I don't deny for a second that there's misogyny and violence and all sorts of problems between men and women. There's also a great deal of kindness and tenderness in my experience. But for me, it was actually about, if I wanted to have random sex sex with someone, did that make me a slut in the eyes of other women, in the eyes of men, or was I actually enfranchising my sexuality? And that secondly, that there is always going to be people who have a problem with it, whether or not they watch pornography. I'm sure it has an effect, but I think it's more about humans, human anger, human fear, and so on. The pornography, sex work, and so on are vehicles through which these are expressed. Domestic violence and so on. I think that's what you have to look at. Where does the fear and anger come from?
Okay, well, that seems like a very good note to finish on. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Can you please thank Catherine Lumby, Gail Dines, and Kate Holden?